Even if you've never watched the original Star Trek, you've probably seen its wacky alien creatures parodied in memes and pop culture. The infamous Gorn lizard suit, the poor dog trying its best to pass as extraterrestrial, or those alien warriors draped in what looks like carpets. Needless to say, Star Trek's costumes are famous for their unique, unforgettable designs. The iconic uniforms in blue, red and gold, well, actually green, but more on that later, became a staple of pop culture. But few people know the story behind their creation, or the visionary designer who defined sci-fi fashion despite never learning how to sew. When developing the show's pilot, Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry interviewed a dozen costume designers, but couldn't find one who could bring his futuristic vision to life. Since filming was done back to back, the costume department often had just 6 to 8 days to create as many as 30 to 40 costumes. And I mean, they all had to look alien, unique, like nothing the audience had ever seen before. After so many disappointing interviews, Roddenberry was starting to lose hope, until he met William Ware Theiss. Unlike the others, Theiss wasn't just a costume designer, he was a creative problem solver. The two immediately clicked, and Theiss was brought on board, launching a decades-long collaboration. Over the course of the show's 3 seasons, Theiss dressed everyone, from blue-skinned Andorians to the infamous Orion slave girls, and even the Nazi-inspired inhabitants of the planet Ekos, for which the episode Patterns of Force was actually banned from German television until 1995. And Theiss didn't just design costumes, he reinvented them. He dyed one set of uniforms to create another, turned garments inside out to make them look alien, and even crafted costumes out of shower curtains, like these protective suits for example. The thing is, many of the alien outfits seen on the show weren't actually costumes in the traditional sense. Instead, they were often patches, ribbons, scarves and curtains, with actors being quite literally sewn into them on set. The real challenge, however, came when designing the most important element of the show's visual identity, the Starfleet uniforms. Theiss had to balance multiple demands, some from the studio, some from Roddenberry, and surprisingly some from NASA. Given Star Trek's reputation for taking creative liberties with science, it might come as a surprise that the space agency was also involved in the show's production, offering input to enhance its scientific believability. NASA suggested that the crew wear form-fitting jumpsuits, envisioning them as the standard attire for 23rd century astronauts. But Roddenberry immediately rejected the idea, saying that they reminded him of long underwear. Roddenberry, a former World War II pilot and a police officer, was determined to integrate a military-like structure into the ship's daily operations, making it feel like a real working organization rather than just a futuristic backdrop. When it came to uniforms, he took inspiration from the color-coded uniforms used on US Navy vessels, where due to low visibility, crew members needed to recognize each other's roles at a glance. But while Roddenberry was focused on realism, NBC, the network producing the show, had different priorities. Specifically, making the female Starfleet officers wear more revealing outfits. This clashed with Roddenberry's progressive vision of a future where women were treated as equals. And if you remember, in the first pilot episode, The Cage, he boldly dressed female crew members in pants, a choice that was unconventional for 1960s television. However, after much back and forth with the network, a compromise was reached: miniskirts. Highly fashionable at the time, they were paired with shorts and dark tights, blending contemporary trends with Star Trek's futuristic aesthetics. Years later, when NBC faced criticism for sexism, Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura, defended the wardrobe choice in an interview.
I was perfectly all right with it. Miniskirt was the fashion of the day, unlike the fashion of today, which is the micro mini, which is up to your ear.
So, with the look of the uniforms finally decided, the next step was choosing the fabric. Something that might seem like a minor detail, but in reality it played a huge role in how we remember Starfleet uniforms today. With the show's budget limitations, the costumes needed to be cheap to produce. So the choice fell on the newly invented, groundbreaking fabric, velour. It was affordable, easy to maintain, and had a sleek futuristic sheen under studio lights. But while velour looked great on camera, it came with some major drawbacks. It tore easily, which might explain why Captain Kirk seemed to lose his shirt in every other fight scene, and shrank significantly after dry cleaning. which had to be done after every shooting day. You might have noticed that the uniforms were becoming progressively tighter and tighter throughout the first 2 seasons, and William Shatner had to suck in his stomach more and more. By season 3, velour was scrapped in favor of double-knit nylon, a sturdy fabric commonly used in professional baseball uniforms. This brings us to another interesting aspect of velour: its appearance on screen. It was one of those film stock things. It photographed one way, burnt orange or gold, but in reality, it was another. The command shirts were definitely green. So, what color was Captain Kirk's uniform, really? In truth, Kirk's uniform, like the rest of the command crews, was olive green. However, under the bright studio lighting and the quirks of 1960s film stock, it appeared cold on screen. The greener hue is much more noticeable in scenes filmed on location with natural light. And if you look at the original uniforms on display today, photos taken with a flash make them look gold, while dimmer lighting reveals the fabric as, well, green. This might surprise some Star Trek fans, but it makes perfect sense when you consider Kirk's alternate uniforms, his wraparound tunic and dress uniform, which were clearly green. You see, that wasn't an intentional design choice. Those versions were just made from a different fabric that didn't react to lighting the way velour did. The color discrepancy of the uniforms became an unexpected challenge when animators began working on Star Trek the Animated Series in 1973. Without the limitations of unreliable fabrics and tricky lighting, they had to make a decision. Should they depict the uniforms in their originally intended green, or stick with the gold shade that had already become iconic to audiences? The thing is, when Star Trek first aired, many viewers were watching it on black and white TVs. One longtime Trekkie I met at a Star Trek convention told me that as a teen she had no idea what color the uniforms actually were, and the show's visuals were clearly designed with black and white television in mind. Think of Spock's dramatic eyeshadow, or the fact that he was made green-blooded. Roddenberry had originally wanted him to have red skin, but on black and white screens, that would have risked making him look like he was constantly in blackface. Obviously not a good look. For those lucky enough to watch the show in color, the command uniforms had always looked gold. So changing them to green now would have only confused viewers. And if you're interested in Star Trek, you've probably already realized that Star Trek's canon has always been malleable. So it made sense for the animated series to follow audience perception rather than the original intent. Ultimately, the gold uniform was canonized in the animated series and became the standard in all fan materials until the release of Star Trek feature films.
Who do you think you are? I am Captain James T. Kirk of the United Starship Enterprise.
Ironically, by the time Star Trek the Motion Picture began production in 1978, NASA's prediction that jumpsuits would become the norm for astronauts had been proven correct. And Roddenberry, committed to maintaining some level of scientific believability, was forced to incorporate them into Starfleet's new look. You see, the studio wanted to avoid comparisons to military uniforms in the show's relaunch, and at the same time, the original multicolored shirts were rejected as too garish, while the iconic miniskirts were already considered a relic of the sexist 1960s. With Star Trek's original costume designer, William Theis, unavailable due to other commitments, Roddenberry brought in a new designer, Robert Fletcher, who was tasked with reimagining Starfleet's uniforms. Unfortunately, what he delivered is now widely regarded as the worst uniform in the franchise's history. Opting for muted tones ranging from pale blue to dirty beige and nude shades resulted in the Enterprise crew looking more like spa staff than starship officers, and some background extras appeared practically naked on screen.
Oh my!
Not only did these uniforms make it impossible to distinguish the characters' ranks and departments, but they were also surprisingly impractical. I mean, the suits were attached to the actors' shoes, meaning they needed an assistant every time they went to the bathroom. Luckily for all of us, in the next film, The Raw of Khan, it wasn't just Khan who was filled with raw. The cast rebelled and refused to wear the dreadful jumpsuits. Despite the failure of his design, Robert Fletcher remained the costume designer for the next 3 films, promising changes. In Star Trek II, the uniforms returned to a more military-inspired style, with the lead actors wearing maroon jackets featuring overlapping lapels, perfect for dramatically unbuttoning whenever their character needed to look tired or stressed. But if you look closely, you will notice that these maroon uniforms were actually re-dyed and slightly modified versions of the jumpsuits from the first film. The reason for the maroon color, well, it was simply the best shade that stuck to the existing fabric. For the next generation, Roddenberry reunited with Bill Theiss, and together they decided to bring back the iconic miniskirts, but this time make them inclusive. In the next generation, male crew members were occasionally seen wearing the same miniskirts or scans, a hybrid of skirt and pants, reflecting Roddenberry and Theiss's vision of a future where gender norms no longer dictated clothing choices. And besides, Theiss genuinely believed that it was fashionably probable that 400 years from now, men would wear scants. I mean, not even 100 years ago, it was still socially acceptable to dress little boys in dresses. However, the social climate of the 80s and 90s wasn't quite as progressive as the future that Theiss and Roddenberry envisioned. On set, these scans were often the subject of jokes and wisecracks, making it difficult for them to gain traction. And still, Theiss emphasized that his priority was for actors to feel comfortable in his designs, and he wouldn't force anyone to wear something that they weren't at least 80% comfortable with. While Star Trek's DIY costume designs might seem tacky or silly to a 21st century viewer, they were groundbreaking for their time. Unique, original, and unlike anything seen before. Theiss himself was a deeply private person, so little is known about his personal life, but his contribution to Star Trek gave the original series a distinctive charm and laid the foundation for modern sci-fi costume design.